My most popular book, Sabbath Keeping, came out just about 20 years ago. And in those intervening 20 years, I have spoken frequently on Sabbath keeping, various places. Almost every time I speak, if there's a question answer session afterwards, people ask, wait a minute, what about families? What about kids? How do we do this? This is too complicated. This is too hard. Being a parent makes me feel like I'm working 24/7. How do I do this? So I thought it would be good for me to record some of the various answers that I've given over time to that question in this short video. So you know that Sabbath is a choice to rest, usually for 24 hours. Some people keep a shorter Sabbath than that, but the root of the word Sabbath is cease, stop, rest, desist. So of course the first Sabbath question is what am I going to stop doing? Of course, traditionally that was work, but work is so much more complicated in our time. What with people working from home and working at all kinds of odd hours, and then there's housework and there's yard work and there's all kinds of extended family relationships, which often feel like work. So, what am I going to stop doing on the Sabbath is the first question. Second question, what am I going to do in place of what I've stopped doing? So, obviously, for a family, it's we. What are we going to stop doing? And what are we going to do in place of what we've stopped? So for me, figuring out the answer to those questions is informed by two versions of the Sabbath command in the Old Testament. And you may know that the Ten Commandments appears twice, one in Exodus 20 and the second time in Deuteronomy chapter 5. These are two different versions of the tablets, the stone tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai because he broke the first tablets, you may remember. So in the Exodus 20 version, the Sabbath command has the same instructions. You shall rest your wives, children, servants, animals, everybody shall rest. But the reason given in Exodus 20 has to do with creation. God rested at creation, and so we rest too. He rested on the seventh day at creation. So, why can God rest at creation? Well, because the world, the earth, is so abundantly provisioned that things can go on for a 24-hour period without God doing anything because the world is so abundant. So, the first principle of what we do on the Sabbath is how do we engage with this abundant world that God created? When I did the interviews for my book, Sabbath Keeping, I think it was more than half, at least half of the people I interviewed talked about getting out in nature for their Sabbath. And of course, that's ideal with kids. Now, when the second version of the Ten Commandments shows up in Deuteronomy chapter 5, nine of the Ten Commandments are virtually identical, almost identical word for word. But the Sabbath command is different. Now, the command is the same. You shall rest, and lists everybody who should rest. I think when I talked about Genesis 20, I left off the alien in your border too. So everybody you can think of shall rest. But the reason is completely different. The reason is, for you were slaves in Egypt, and I brought you out with a mighty hand. So slavery is the second category to think about what we're going to give up and what we're going to do. What makes you feel enslaved? As a mom, I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years and a part-time student. I felt enslaved by housework and by the endless, ceaseless tidying up, something I'm just really not good at. Um, all kinds of that stuff. So, probably very different for you. But what I want to do here is talk about what my husband and I did over the course of our Sabbath keeping when we had children in the home. And then I want to talk about two families who I interviewed for my books, Sabbath Keeping. And interestingly, I went back to one of those families afterwards and got more information that I wished I could have put in the book. So, what my husband and I did, we lived in Israel for 18 months, way back when we were young adults. Our older son was born in Israel and he's in his 40s now. So That lets you know how long we've been doing versions of a Sabbath. It's been a huge, huge practice for us. So we lived in Israel almost a year when Jonathan was born. And so we lived there another 6 months after he was born. Before he was born, we of course had developed habits to cope with the fact that nothing was open on the Sabbath day. We lived in North Tel Aviv, one of the most Jewish parts of Israel. There's parts of Israel that are not dominantly Jewish, and there's be stores or shops open there. But where we lived, everything was closed. Movie theaters, restaurants, even the gas stations and mini marts at the gas station. So it wasn't like you could say, oh, I forgot such and such. I'll just run around to the mini mart and pick that up. There were no options for entertainment. The buses did not run, and we didn't have a car, we didn't have bicycles. So, really, on the Sabbath day, we could walk, and that was pretty much about it. So we had developed patterns before Jonathan was born. And, I don't want to take time in this video to talk about all those patterns, but it took us a while to adjust. So after Jonathan was born, we continued those patterns, which were, hang around. Dave liked to go, my husband liked to go bird watching in this field near where we lived. And I like to write letters, and I cooked on the Sabbath day because it was, something to do. um, all of that, of course, slowed down when Jonathan was born. I mean, Dave still might go out and bird watch while Jonathan was napping, or I might write letters like I had done a lot of before he was born. But, we just hung out. No money was spent because there was nowhere to spend money. This was, of course, pre computers and pre telephones and pre-email. And of course, we chose not to have a TV, so we didn't have TV to watch. I actually don't know if there was TV running in that time period or not. I don't know because we didn't have a TV. But it was so quiet. Oh my goodness. The traffic noise settled way down because so many fewer people were going places. It was just really a lovely, peaceful time. So we came back to the US with our 6-month-old baby in tow. And this was long enough ago that our Christian friends were not interested in our Sabbath experience in Israel. So we decided, well, we loved it. So we'll keep doing a version of it. We'll have it be Sunday instead of Saturday, as it was in Israel. And we'll go to church in the morning, and then we'll just do the same kind of stuff in the afternoon that we did before. We won't shop. We'll pretend that everything's closed. And I decided that I divided parenting into two parts. One part was the being with our son, and the other part was what I call the work of parenting. That was including the tidying up, which, like I said, is not my favorite thing, but that included the shopping, the planning, the organization, and of course, as kids got older, it included all kinds of other stuff too. So we had a second son a couple years after we got back from Israel, and what we did on our Sabbath days, we went to church, like I said, and then we often would take the kids somewhere to a park close by or something. We'd get outside as much as we could. Sometimes we'd trade off, and Dave would stay with the kids while I went for a walk. Walking alone was one of my real pleasures in those days. And then I would stay with the kids while he went for a walk or a bike ride or something. Sometimes we belonged to a babysitting co-op, and sometimes we would arrange for our kids to go to somebody's house so that Dave and I could have an afternoon together, just relaxing, and or we might go somewhere for a long walk. Um, but it was a peaceful, quiet time when the kids were preschoolers. As they got into school and got a little bit older, we let the Sabbath emerge as it emerged. We kept the same commitments. So my husband was teaching at the University of Washington, and he did not bring work home or do work on the Sabbath day. I was a part-time student. I did not study on the Sabbath day. I continued to not do the work of being a mom. I didn't do any Sabbath day, and I didn't do any tidying up. I didn't do any housework, yard work, any of that kind of stuff. One of my favorite memories from when the kids were in elementary school was a period when the it had been raining here in Seattle, raining, 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 and it was clear on the Sunday, and it was supposed to start raining again, Monday or Tuesday. And so Dave said, look, I never mow the lawn on Sundays, but I need to do it. The lawn is so long and I just need to do it. And one of our kids said, Daddy, we don't mow lawns on Sundays. So our kids had absorbed this value that Sunday's a different day. You do your home repairs and your gardening, or at least I don't like to didn't like gardening. And so for me, that was work. I didn't want to do gardening on Sundays. Some people love gardening, and that's how they get out in nature on their Sabbath day. So, I'm not saying gardening is work for everybody, but for me, it was work. So all those work things around the house we did on Saturdays, and we kept the Sundays free. Anyway, as the boys got older, we let things emerge as they emerged. So other families really insist on keeping their Sabbath day as a family day. And we didn't do that. I don't know if we made the right decision or the wrong decision, but we let things emerge with time. So, like the boys might want to go to a friend's house, or they might want to have friends over. They might have, some commitment, and we might take them to them on a Sunday. They did not do Sunday sports in those days. That's another topic that I want to address a little bit later. But for us, we just let Sunday emerge. Now, when our kids were mid teenagers, I was ordained as a Presbyterian minister. And so Sunday mornings for me were work. And I was exhausted in the afternoon. Our church had two services, and so I had to be there for both. And I was often teaching an adult Sunday school class opposite one of the services. So, it was a 5-hour workday for me, and I was really tired by the afternoon. So, for those years, Dave would do something with the kids. And then, like, it was a total miracle. Um, he started working Tuesdays through Fridays and had Monday off. And so he and I would have a Sabbath on Monday morning after I'd gotten some energy back. But for all those years of Sabbath as a family, I kept cooking on the Sabbath day. Point one, I like cooking. Point two, we often enjoyed having people over on Sunday night. Now, again, nothing that I'm saying here is a recommendation to anybody. I'm just throwing out options. For us, that worked. The kind of fun, social, having a family over and I think our kids and their kids running around, that was part of Sundays for us. And to make that happen, I could. So, that worked for us. Wouldn't work for everybody. Let me tell you about these two other families. So, the one family I interviewed when their kids were in elementary school, and they did something that Dave and I had never done. They marked the beginning of the Sabbath day with a little mini ceremony. They decided their Sabbath would be from right at dinner time on Saturday to right at dinner time on Sunday. So this allowed them Sunday evening to get organized for the week. So they began their Sabbath with right before dinner on Saturday with a breath prayer. So it would be breathe in God's love, breathe out your worries into God's presence, breathe in God's love, breathe out your worries. And they might together as a family do 10 slow breaths doing that. And the parents told me that when they forgot to do the breath prayer, their kids reminded them because they loved it so much. One of their big commitments was to have the kids get their chores and their homework done before dinner on Saturday. And what this did, so one of the stresses of parenting elementary school and older kids, of course, is homework, weekend homework. And so Sunday can become a real day of nagging and stress to try to get that homework done. So they completely short circuited that. And the homework's all done before dinner on Sunday, or excuse me, dinner on Saturday, the chores are done. And then that 24-hour period, they can do whatever they want. They didn't talk a lot about what they did. It was kind of like my family, they let it emerge what it was, but nobody had work hanging over them for that 24-hour period. The parents didn't, and the kids didn't. And that was really, really cool. Now, in the Jewish tradition, there's a ceremony to mark both the beginning and the end of the Sabbath. And the ceremony at the end of the Sabbath in the Jewish tradition involves a cool, usually like a metal box with holes in it. And you put fragrant spices inside and you smell the spices and you you pray that God will enable you to take that delicious smell of the Sabbath into the rest of the week. And if part of how we can celebrate a Sabbath with families, with children, is to spend time connecting with nature. Well, smells, there's a connection for you. Very think a tactile sensory thing that I think that kids would love. One of my big regrets is we never did a ceremony to begin or end the Sabbath. I mean, in Israel, we were on our own in our apartment. We didn't know at that time how Jewish people began and ended the Sabbath. We just had this day when no shops were open and there was nothing to do. So we didn't understand the more sort of ceremonial aspects, but kids love ceremonies. I mean, traditional Jewish beginning of the Sabbath involves lighting candles. Well, kids love candles and eating that delicious challah bread, which is braided bread that's made with eggs and a little more sugar than regular bread. It's very sweet and delicious. We often bought it on Fridays in Israel and ate it. We loved it, but we didn't know that it was related to kind of a ceremonially beginning the Sabbath, but a special bread to have for the beginning of the Sabbath. I mean, that I think kids would really love a tradition like that. So let me tell you about another family. In this family, the man was a minister of a very, very small church. So he was alone all week, getting ready for Sunday with the occasional meeting, but it wasn't like a big church where a lot was going on. So he was alone a lot during the week. His wife was a stay-at-home mom and worked part-time. And so she was really relationally busy all week with kids, and her work was relational as well. So he really set out on the Sabbath day. They had a Sabbath day on Sundays after, including church for him, which is a whole other story about how do ministers have Sabbath days. But in the Sunday afternoon and evening, he really went out of his way to help his wife have a quiet Sabbath. He tried to do the things that she mostly did during the week, like dishes and cooking um, and just tried to give her peace and downtime on Sundays, which I thought was beautiful. The other thing he said that was beautiful was he said that um, he believes that his job as a parent is to shape his children into what God has planned for them, help them to grow into being their true selves. And that includes growing into discipline, growing into character. And his job is to shape them. But he says, that's my job 6 days a week. My job on the Sabbath day is to enjoy them. So he was just really careful on the Sabbath day. He didn't, I mean, I'm sure there were moments when he had to correct them, but he tried really not to. He tried to not think about teaching them anything on the Sabbath day, just accept enjoyment and how much they're loved by him. So this was a fabulous model to me. And I really wished that I thought about that when I had young kids. But then I looked back and I went, well, that's kind of what we did. Because the whole pattern of my 6 days a week when I had young kids was a constant multitasking. Kids are playing and I'm kind of semi supervising them playing, but I'm in the kitchen doing something and then I'm trying to tidy up. Like I said, I hate that. I'm trying to house clean. I'm making lists of things to buy. We've got to go run this errand. We've got all this juggling, multitasking. And yet on Sundays, I didn't have to do that. So I did enjoy my kids more. I just wish I'd articulated that at the time. This last family that I interviewed, the father said one more thing that's interesting. He said the biggest challenge in their church for the parents of young children is sports and Sundays. And I told you we didn't have that because in our day, 40 years ago, at least in Seattle, there really weren't sports on Sundays. But there really are now because those sporting fields have to be used around the clock. And I want to suggest a helpful idea, which is maybe the most important thing to give up on the Sabbath is multitasking. So that maybe on the Sabbath, you go to your kid's sports event and you don't read your phone the whole time. You don't juggle between your phone and watching them. You don't run an errand on the way to the event and you don't run an errand on the way home. Or Maybe you take a picnic and you stay after the event and you just relax. But this idea of focusing on one thing only on the Sabbath day rather than this juggling that we do, I really think um, I think using the lens of multitasking as a way to simplify on the Sabbath is really helpful. I heard a Sabbath suggestion that you might find amusing, which is don't use any appliances on the Sabbath. I thought that was a really cute way to think about, okay, we just won't do housey stuff that day. And again, I want to say nobody can do all these things I've mentioned, but I'm just throwing out a lot of options. In the Jewish tradition, you don't handle money on the Sabbath and you don't think about money. So you don't worry about money on the Sabbath day. And I will say, for me, when I feel a worry coming through my mind on my Sabbath day, I often just say, I can think about that tomorrow. Let's just let that go. So that kind of freedom from worry, and for many, of course, that's related to money. But I also want to propose it'd be interesting to think about what would it be like to have a Sabbath day without money with children, where you don't go to Wild Waves or to a movie or you don't go to entertainment that involves, driving somewhere and then waiting in line and then all those crowded people and all that stuff going on. Maybe you say, what we do on our Sabbath day is things that don't involve money. So we go to parks, we walk in our neighborhood, we if there's a lake, we swim in the lake, things that are free. I don't know. But it's worth thinking about the role of money and how to separate money. So I've left until last, really, the big topic for Sabbath and families and Sabbath and adults and Sabbath and everybody, which is technology. So, is it possible to put down our cell phones for a day? Is it possible to not watch anything on a screen for a day? Is it possible to seriously experience a day of stopping technology? I don't know, but it's worth talking about. It's one more thing that's worth talking about. I do think I just love the multitasking thing though, because that was so important for me to remove multitasking. When I cooked on the Sabbath day, I told you I cooked, but my husband was playing with the kids while I cooked. Whereas on weekdays, I was cooking and juggling the kids all at the same time. So that kind of focus on one thing. And I wonder if we could somehow bring that focus on one thing into our use of technology on the Sabbath day as well. If our goal is to enjoy our children, then of course we have to be paying attention to them. But anyway, I hope that all of these will give you some ideas, and I hope and pray that families can find patterns that really work well with them for the Sabbath day. Blessings to you.